Hello, welcome to Capturing Christianity. My name is Cameron Bertuzzi. Today I am here with Dr. Liz Jackson, who is a friend of the channel. She's coming back on the channel. This is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while now, and the way that I've currently titled this video, it's gone through like 6 different title changes. Right now, it's titled How Skepticism Can Be Irrational. So the idea that we basically want to do in this video is Liz has actually prepared a bunch of slides. I say a bunch, it's like 8. But she's prepared some slides about the history of skepticism, what it's looked like, some of the responses to skepticism, and then we're going to turn our sights to religious skepticism, or how skepticism is kind of used online, on YouTube and everything. And so we're going to get a much better idea, hopefully by the end of this, of what skepticism is and how to do skepticism the right way, how to avoid kind of irrational skepticism, which is possible. It may not seem like that's possible. It is possible, and we're going to get to that in this live stream. But before we begin, Liz, is there anything that you would like to say in terms of like giving an update to the audience about your situation? Because you were teaching in Australia, now you're back in the States, is that right?
Yep. So I forget when I was last on your channel. We definitely did a live stream when I was in Australia, and then I think we might have done one when I was in Michigan. I came back because of COVID. I'm currently teaching at Ryerson University in Toronto, but because of COVID, it's fully remote. So my husband is in real estate. He's starting a real estate business, and so he's actually flipping a house in Tampa that we're going to turn into a rental. So I'm actually in Tampa right now, of all places. We sort of tried to take some of the unfortunate parts of COVID and make the best of it. So we're here in Tampa. We're enjoying the warm weather. And we're going to be here probably till next summer, and then we'll be moving to Toronto, God willing. So, yeah.
Well, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of a celebrity at this point. There's people really like you. You've had your debate.
Aww.
I think the last thing that you did with us was your debate with Alex O'Connor. I think that got a whole lot of attention. It was great. It was a great dialogue and everything. Well, let's jump right into the topic. So we're talking again about skepticism. Liz, I can pull up the slides that we've got prepared, but is there anything that you'd like to say before I put them up?
No, I thought your intro was great. So I think, yeah, basically
Cool.
our topic today is just going to be kind of the way philosophers think and talk about skepticism, and then kind of comparing and contrasting that with, I think, some the more popular, what skepticism means in a more popular realm. So I'm excited.
All right, here we go. So here's the first slide, which is just the title slide, How Skepticism Can Be Irrational, which, as I said, it can be irrational, and it may not seem like it can be, but we're going to talk about that. So, all right, here's the first slide. Take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off the presentation by just talking a little bit about philosophical skepticism, when philosophers use the term skepticism, what that means. And I think when it comes to philosophy and epistemology more specifically, skeptics generally make 2 claims that are related but distinct. The first, and I think maybe more common one, is a claim about knowledge. So that's the claim that we can know nothing or almost nothing. So if I had to give, I think, a definition of skepticism, it would be that, the claim that we can know nothing or almost nothing. But skeptics often make a claim that's, I think, related to some of the things we're going to talk about later, a claim about belief as well. And that's the claim that we should withhold belief on everything or almost everything. So let me say a little bit about what that means. So when it comes to believing something and the belief attitudes we can take towards some claim or sentence, philosophers call that a proposition. A lot of philosophers think there's basically 3 main attitudes we can take. We can believe it, we can withhold belief on it, or we can disbelieve it. So when you believe it, you say it's true. When you disbelieve it, you say it's false. But there are some claims that we don't really take a stand on them. We say whether they're true or false. So the claim, there's an even number of stars, or there's an even number of hairs on my head. Those are claims that I withhold belief on. And so some skeptics, a lot of philosophical skeptics, say that we should withhold belief on almost all claims. And we're going to talk more about some skeptics in the history of philosophy and sort of why they thought this. So I just wanted to throw in a quick clarification here. You might say, well, why almost everything? And I think the reason is because a lot of philosophical skeptics, they deny So they would say we can't know things about the external world. So even, there's a mic in front of me or it's sunny out today, we can't know those things. We're going to talk about why in a second. But we can still know things like I'm in pain or I'm perceiving something red. Not there is something red right there, but that I'm perceiving that. So we can still know these really basic things about the inside of our own minds that we kind of perceive directly, but we can't know things about the external world. Okay, why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so I just wanted to touch on here a brief history of skepticism and kind of some of the big players when it comes to kind of the foundations of philosophical skepticism. So some of the first skeptics were called Pyrrhonian skeptics. And actually, it would be a really interesting topic, just what Pyrrhonian skepticism is exactly, how that contrasts with, I think, what's called academic skepticism, which Descartes and Hume are more academic skeptics. We probably won't be able to get into all of that here, but Pyrrhonian skeptics are interesting just because they were sort of some of the first skeptics in the history of philosophy. And basically what they said is they made this belief claim, the second claim we were talking about. They said we should withhold belief on all matters, including the scope of our knowledge. So they wouldn't even say we can know nothing or almost nothing. They would say we should withhold belief on that. And they argue that this leads to inner peace because it enables us to avoid dogmatism. So they sort of set the stage for skepticism. But if you take an intro to philosophy class or an epistemology class, probably one of the things you'll read is Descartes, and specifically Descartes' Meditations. So Descartes is probably one of the most famous skeptics in the history of philosophy. And Descartes basically did this thing that's called the method of doubt, where he said, I want to doubt everything I can doubt. I just want to, anything that I can bring into doubt, I want to bring that into doubt. And you might think, well, okay, like, I think abortion's wrong, so I could doubt that. I can doubt these controversial things. But Descartes said we can doubt a lot more than we even think we can. So Descartes thought we could doubt whether there's a physical world around us. And he sort of motivated this by saying, well, look, you could be dreaming. What if you're in a dream? Often when you're in a dream, you think you're in reality, but you don't know it. So that's called the dreaming argument. I might think there's a mic in front of me right now, but really, what if I'm dreaming? Or what if I'm in the Matrix? Or what if I'm a brain in a vat, And these might seem like very far-fetched possibilities, but they're actually really, really hard to rule out because we wouldn't really know it if we were in the Matrix or a brain in a vat. And then Descartes basically said, well, at least I could know that 1 + 1 = 2, or a square has 4 sides. I can't doubt that. And then he brought in what's called the evil genius argument. And basically Descartes thought, and this is controversial, but he thought that it's possible that there's some evil genius who's deceiving you even about the truths of math and logic. So that if P then Q, P therefore Q, so modus ponens, 1 + 1 = 2. If there is some evil genius that's controlling your mind, that there's even room to doubt basic truths of math and logic like that. And then that brought Descartes to what's famously known as the cogito, which Descartes said, well, I have one fundamental thing that I can't doubt. And that's, I think, therefore I am. So Descartes said, look, I know that I'm thinking. Even an evil genius, if he was controlling me and making me doubt math, making me doubt logic, he still couldn't deceive me about the fact that I'm thinking right now. And because I'm thinking right now, I have to exist because there's something doing the thinking. And then Descartes used this statement, I think, therefore I am, to then try to go back and rebuild that knowledge. And obviously, it's very controversial whether he was successful at that. He threw in a couple arguments for God along the way, which are also obviously controversial. So that was sort of Descartes and his skepticism. And then the last person I wanted to talk about here was Hume. And Hume is interesting because Hume was also a skeptic about many, many things, including induction. Hume's argument against induction is very influential. Induction is the idea that the future will be like the past. And so, if the laws of nature hold today, that gives us good reason to think they'll hold tomorrow, for example. He was a skeptic about causation. He also had a famous argument against miracles. But one reason I wanted to include Hume here as well is because Hume actually wasn't convinced by Descartes' argument, I think, therefore I am. And Hume said, even if you think, or even if there's a thought, you can't conclude that there's a self, that you actually exist. There could just be a thought or a belief or a desire, but Hume didn't think that Descartes had established beyond doubt that there's a self, that I exist. So Hume even took Descartes' kind of fundamental piece of knowledge and even brought that into doubt.
Good old
So,
Hume.
yeah, Hume is a very interesting person. I actually like Hume's writing a lot, but yes, very, very skeptical. So these are just three big players in the history of skepticism. I'm not necessarily, obviously there's a lot more I could talk about here, but I was just trying to give a basic overview because this background knowledge is important when we're talking about what skepticism means to philosophers and sort of giving us a foundation for philosophical skepticism. So these are some of the reasons that philosophers have argued that, it's not a super common position, but there are still philosophical skeptics today that say we can know nothing or almost nothing because we can doubt so many things. Again, because we could be dreaming, because we could be deceived about math and logic. We might not even be able to know that we exist if Hume's right. So that's kind of a brief history of philosophical skepticism. I don't know if you want to add anything, Cam, but we can go to the next slide if not.
Well, I don't have anything to add. I do have some questions that I'd like to ask you. So the Pyrrhonian school, I assume that there's not a whole lot of Pyrrhonian skeptics nowadays. Would you agree with that? Or do you know any?
I don't know any personally that would identify as Pyrrhonian skeptics. I do think some people like the view and enjoy reading it. I don't, but I mean, I don't know all philosophers either, so there probably is that I just don't know of. But I don't personally know anyone that would identify as a Pyrrhonian skeptic.
Okay. Yeah, so I just want to give some the audience kind of idea of where we're headed with this. So she's about to give like some of the traditional responses to skepticism, which is going to get into some really, really interesting territory, but it's all going to tie back into the title of this, which is how skepticism can be irrational. And so just stick around. You don't want to skip off too soon. So that's all I wanted to say. All right. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. And yeah, the responses to skepticism.
Absolutely. So in terms of when you look at the history of epistemology, and I'm going to recommend a couple of resources at the end. So I'm getting a lot of this from a book by Robert Pasnow I think it's called After Certainty, and it's about the history of epistemology. But Pasnow thinks Locke is a huge turning point in the history of skepticism. And Locke wrote a lot of things. He made a lot of points, but one of the points Locke made is he said, why is everyone so preoccupied with certainty? Descartes and Hume and these others and I didn't even touch on, Aristotle could fall into this camp, arguably, other even Christian philosophers like Anselm and Aquinas arguably had some kind of, they propped up certainty as some kind of epistemic ideal, and some of them would say that's where faith comes in. Anselm and Aquinas would, for example, but that's not the topic of today. But Locke said, instead of trying to be certain about everything, our epistemic goal should be to proportion our beliefs to the evidence. So if you have a lot of evidence for something, then you should be pretty confident of it. If I have a lot of evidence, there's a microphone in front of me, I should be pretty confident of it. Instead of just being obsessive about, but can I doubt that? Am I really certain of that? And Locke said, no, just stop worrying about certainty. Let's worry about proportionality. That's not going to be as central to what Cam and I think, want to focus on today, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I do think a lot of people think Locke and his proportionality principle sort of mark a turning point from this history of lots and lots of skepticism to maybe the way that a lot of epistemologists today, I think about epistemic norms, what we should believe, how we should form our beliefs from an epistemic point of view. So that was Locke. And then William James is someone who I really wanted to focus on. And I think Cam's a fan of this way of thinking too. William James is one of my favorite philosophers. And William James said, well, look, when it comes to epistemology, we don't just have one goal. We actually have two epistemic goals. And those goals are, we want to believe true things and we want to avoid false things. So, you could believe every single statement or proposition. You could believe P and you could believe not P for every proposition. You could just believe everything. And that would be a good way to believe true things. You would get a lot of true beliefs if you did that, but you would also have a ton of false beliefs. So maybe you don't want to just believe everything. On the other hand, you could believe nothing, like what the skeptics do. But the problem with that is you might avoid false beliefs, but you're going to miss out on all these potential true beliefs that you could get. So William James said, here's the problem with skepticism. The problem is that these people are so obsessed with avoiding error that they miss out on the value of true beliefs. And arguably, that's just as irrational as literally believing everything. I mean, that's a great way to get a bunch of true beliefs, but then, the worry is you also get a bunch of false beliefs too.
You're not avoiding error.
But if you don't believe in, yeah, exactly. But again, if you're just a skeptic and you don't believe anything, you're avoiding error, but you're not believing the truth. And so William James argues we need to balance these two goals and kind of fall somewhere in the middle. We don't believe everything, but we don't believe nothing. And that's sort of the best way to optimize these two goals. So in other words, I guess to summarize, he says, look, skeptic, true beliefs are valuable. You're ignoring the value of true beliefs and you're just obsessing over the value of avoiding false beliefs.
That's great. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
William James, he's really, really cool. Tell me the name of the article that this was found in. Was this found in an article or a book of his?
The book that I would recommend, it's called The Will to Believe.
Yes.
William James is great. I love William James. He actually gives something like a version of Pascal's Wager too. He arguably talked about epistemic permissivism before it was cool. William James is great. But yeah, The Will to Believe is a great place to start. He's also pretty easy to read as well. So maybe I should have put that on the recommended resources as well. I'll add that right now. So read William James. But I think
we'll
the
have to
next
put that in
slide,
afterward.
the next slide is cool, and I want Cam to say a little bit about this too. But Cam sort of did a survey on this Jamesian thing, believing truth versus avoiding error. So
yeah, it was really cool. I was just like, I was wondering what the people that follow the channel, the subscribers and everything. I was curious, like, just kind of what are some of the general thoughts of the people that follow the channel. What do you guys think about this? Are they equally valuable? Is avoiding false beliefs equally valuable as obtaining true beliefs? Is one more valuable than the other? This actually surprised me. The majority of people, as you can see here, there was 5.3 thousand votes, which is a ton of votes. But over half of people said that they're equally valuable. Only 9% said avoiding false beliefs is more valuable. And then 35% of people said obtaining true beliefs is the most valuable. I find that fascinating because like you just pointed out, Liz, skepticism is kind of about the first one, avoiding false beliefs. Yep. But the people that follow this page value obtaining true beliefs, but then most people value both. And I think that's where people should land, is you want to value both, because if you value one over the other, then you're going to basically have too many true beliefs, or you're going to have too many false beliefs, or you're not going to have any true beliefs at all. So that's why it's equally valuable to have these two. So I just thought that was really cool to see what people thought about this.
I totally agree. I think it's really interesting. I
wasn't sure where it was going to land.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that even if you did fall in that first camp, which I guess was only like 9% of your viewers, the avoiding false beliefs camp, if you think there's any value to true beliefs, even if avoiding false beliefs is still somewhat valuable, you still probably shouldn't be a skeptic. You would almost have to say that obtaining true beliefs has little to no value, and avoiding false beliefs is all that matters. So even among these options, like even someone that among that 9%, I think would still have a reason, based on what William James says, to at least go out and try to believe some true things, But even so, what 52 plus 35%? That's like 87%. 87% of people either thought obtaining true beliefs was even more valuable, or that both are equally valuable. So yeah, I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, another thought that I have is like, I think that the people the skeptics, I'll just call them skeptics, who really value avoiding false beliefs, what type of argument would they give against someone who basically thinks that it's more valuable to hold true beliefs and to have sort of more beliefs in general? Like, what is the argument that what they're doing is worse than what you're doing, or you're avoiding all of these beliefs? To me, like, maybe I just haven't read enough, or I don't know some of the arguments in the literature, but it doesn't seem to me like there's some obvious, reason that you have to think that this other group, the 35% of people, that they're irrational or anything. It's just, I don't know. It's just really interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's a very risk-averse position. Basically, you don't even want to take a step out there and believe like there's a microphone in front of you, because like, what if it's false? What if I'm a brain in a vat? It's just like one of those people that like stays at home all day in a bubble because they're like too scared of whatever, whatever they're scared of. It's like they're epistemically scared,
Yeah, and to me, caution is still good. Like, you can be cautious, but if you're overly cautious, then you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff. And that's kind of the point.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to the next slide. Here you go. What does all of this have to do with religion? Yeah. Where are we going with this?
Yeah, so, this is Capturing Christianity. This isn't a nerdy epistemology channel. Like, why are we talking about this? What does this have to do with religion or religious belief? And here what I want to do is kind of contrast what we've just been talking about, which is philosophical or academic skepticism, with what I think the word skeptic or skepticism means in certain non-philosophical contexts. So YouTube, I think, might be an example of this. And I think in places like YouTube, when people say, I'm a skeptic, they're not using the term in the way that philosophers normally do. So when a philosopher tells me I'm a skeptic, what they mean is I'm a global skeptic. And global skepticism is a view that says we can't know, or we should withhold belief on everything or almost everything. So they're challenging knowledge as a whole, and they're challenging believing things as a whole. Like Descartes and the Pyrrhonians and Hume, these people were global skeptics. They thought, we should give up most of our knowledge, or, we can't know almost anything, right?
Yeah, their skepticism was not applied locally.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas local skepticism is skepticism about a particular realm, like a particular topic or something. So you could be like a memory skeptic, for example. You could think we can't trust our memory. But let's start with that example first and then talk about religion. So let's say you're a memory skeptic and you say we can't trust our memory. Either, memory can't give us knowledge, or we should withhold belief on all of our memory beliefs. But let's say you weren't a global skeptic and you still thought, well, we can trust our perception. I can know there's a mic in front of me, but I just should doubt that I had eggs for breakfast this morning. So the big question for that kind of position is, well, why one and not the other? Like, what's so suspicious about memory that makes us doubt that? But we can still trust perception. Remember, a global skeptic would say you should doubt both. In both cases, you can't have knowledge. But if you're just wanting to be a skeptic about memory, you need a special reason or a special justification for why memory is so epistemically suspicious. What goes wrong, when it comes to memory? Otherwise, your view just kind of looks ad hoc. You're just sort of picking this certain realm, and you're just saying, we can't have knowledge here, but you're not doubting all these other realms. So you need a special reason or a special justification for why that realm in particular.
Man, this actually ties. Sorry, I'm up. I have the Kalam cosmological argument on my brain. I'm currently editing my second rebuttal in my debate with Stephen Woodford, and one of the central points in this is that limits have an explanation. And so I was just thinking, like, if you're going to limit your skepticism to this one little area, that limit is, in other words, what you're saying is that limits need an explanation. You need to explain why you want to limit it to this particular area. But if you just want to say that there's no limit on skepticism, it doesn't seem like we need any kind of explanation, because skepticism is just applied equally across everything. So I just found that interesting, the tie over to this principle about limits and how limits seem to need an explanation. I think that might be kind of one of the reasons, if you think that that's a good principle, that limits need explanation, you want to, that it obviously applies in this case. It's like, if you want to limit skepticism to one domain, to religion or to memory or to perception or whatever, then you've got to have some reason to want to limit it like that. I just thought that was interesting, a kind of connection there between these two things.
Totally. And so there's global skeptics that say skepticism about everything. And then there's non-skeptics that say we're not going to treat a certain domain differently. Maybe we'll just have a general epistemic rule like follow your evidence or something, but we're not saying we're skeptics about this particular domain, So there's global skeptics and there's non-skeptics, but local skeptics, I think, have this challenge, which is why that domain? We need some kind of explanation. And this isn't to say all local skepticism is irrational. It's just saying you need a reason to treat that domain differently.
Right.
So hopefully that's clear.
Yeah.
And I think go ahead.
I was just going to say that the next slide kind of makes the last point that you said, it makes it a little bit clearer.
Mm-hmm. So I think this kind of brings up two questions for those who are local skeptics about religion, which is, again, I think the position in places like YouTube when people say I'm a skeptic, I think that's often what they mean. They mean they're a skeptic about religion. They don't mean they're a skeptic about scientific knowledge. They're not a skeptic about whether there's a microphone in front of them. They're probably not even a skeptic about like moral claims necessarily. I mean, some might be, but they're probably not a skeptic about math. So there's a lot of things they're probably not a skeptic about. They're just sort of treating religion as this domain that they're a local skeptic about religion.
Yeah.
And so the first question, it's what we've just been saying. Well, why are you treating religion differently than these other domains? Why is your skepticism applied to kind of all and only religious claims? I mean, why is religion so special that it deserves this kind of skepticism? And I wanted to kind of consider two responses that someone might give to that. And I think, Cam, you might want to add some stuff here too as well, and say why I don't think they're effective. So the first reason someone might give, they might say, well, I want to treat religion differently because I like science. And there's different ways you could spell this out, but you might say religion isn't testable or falsifiable in a way that a claim like there's a microphone here or some claim about science is. You might say religion isn't adequately based on like empirical evidence. So there's different ways you can spell this out. And I actually have a paper I'm going to talk about in a second where I respond to this in a lot more detail. But I think the basic crux of the response is, well, if you really want something to be testable or you really want something to be based on empirical evidence, you're going to have to be skeptical about a lot more than religion. So again, claims like torturing babies for fun are wrong. Those aren't testable. Those aren't based on empirical evidence. Math arguably isn't based on empirical evidence. And a lot of claims, like a ton of philosophical claims, like we have free will, those aren't purely testable or these purely scientific claims either. And even the claim itself that like science is the best epistemology, that's not testable or based just on empirical evidence. So the problem here is if you want to say religion is bad because it's opposed to science or not testable, that skepticism isn't going to be a local skepticism that just involves religion. It's going to involve a lot of philosophical claims, mathematical claims, claims about rationality. So you're going to have to be skeptical about a lot more than just religious claims.
Yeah, I don't have anything more to add on that one. I think in the next one I do.
Cool. Yeah. The second reason someone might want to treat religion differently than other domains is because religion involves claims about miracles, and they might just be really, really skeptical about claims about miracles. And arguably Hume was too, although again, Hume was a skeptic about way more than just religion. So we have to remember that. But yeah, you might say, well, religion is problematic because it involves these claims about miracles. And I think there's at least two things to say here, and Cam might have more as well. The first is that not all religious claims involve miracles. Even the claim God exists arguably doesn't automatically posit that a miracle occurred, especially not one specific miracle. The Bible is God's word. Like that doesn't necessarily commit us to a miracle. So there's a lot of religious claims that don't necessarily involve miracles. But I think the second thing to note here too is like everything I've said so far is consistent with the idea that certain miracle claims like God healed my mother of cancer miraculously, not via natural means. Everything I've said is consistent with the idea that you might need more evidence to justify belief in that claim specifically. But we should still follow the evidence where it leads. And if you do have a lot of evidence for some miracle claim, like maybe Jesus' resurrection, for instance, then you should believe that. Remember Locke's proportionality principle: proportion your beliefs to the evidence. So I think in this case, even if a miracle, we shouldn't just expect there to be miracles all the time or just believe in them on a whim. There's no reason to rule them out a priori. We shouldn't just say, we just rule out miracle claims without some kind of special reason. So those were some things I wanted to say about that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Cam.
Yeah, so my thought is that I wanted to just kind of pinpoint, like, what is it about miracles in particular that is making you skeptical about them? And I think what it is that a lot of people will say, a lot of skeptics, and well, I mean, I'm even using the term wrong here, in a non-philosophical way.
Religious skeptics, yeah.
Religious skeptics will say, well, they'll say it's just inherently unlikely, and I'm using that term to actually kind of, I'm using a colloquial term that in epistemology, technically, prior probability is what they'll say. The prior probability of some claim, so like before we look at any evidence, it's just really unlikely that this miracle happened, because miracles are just inherently unlikely. They rarely happen, so it's very, very unlikely before we even consider any evidence that this thing happened. The point that I would want to make in response to this is, A, you can still have evidence that overcomes that initial improbability, if that's what it is. But then B, again, it's not just going to apply to religious claims. There are tons of different things in other domains that start out with their really low improbabilities. For instance, the probability that my house is sitting on this exact plot of land, the prior probability of that is very, 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 very low. It could have been an inch to the right, an inch to the left. It could have been almost anywhere on the earth. And well, anywhere that there's land. But the point is that it's really improbable that it's on this particular plot of land. So just because something is sort of inherently unlikely on the face of it, it doesn't follow that you don't have evidence or that you don't have reasons to believe that thing is true or that thing happened. So the point that I'm making is kind of the same point that the first point that you made, is that your skepticism is going to apply to other areas. It's not just going to apply to religion. So it looks really, really difficult to be a local skeptic about religion for, some sort of principled reason. It doesn't seem like that exists. And so if you want to be a skeptic, this is kind of the overall point here. If you want to be a skeptic, you've got to be consistent with how you apply your skepticism. Don't just apply it to religious claims, apply it to every claim. Apply it globally, apply it consistently. That's kind of the point here. So that's all that I wanted to say in response to the miracles thing. We can pull up the slides again, and just I think you've got one more at the end with some resources and stuff. But you also have this other question here that we haven't gotten to.
Yeah, we're almost done. But yeah, I think the second question that I think this topic raises is, to the religious skeptic, do you care about getting true beliefs in addition to avoiding false ones? And you might care about true beliefs in other realms like science or perception or something, but what about true beliefs in the realm of religion? Wouldn't that be really important? It's not again, and Cam did that survey, avoiding error isn't all there is to epistemology. We also want to get at the truth, and true belief is valuable. So if you care about getting true beliefs, this is almost Pascalian in a way. It might be worth taking the risk and believing something, especially if you have a lot to gain and not much to lose. Taking risks is fun. Maybe that's just my personality, but I kind of like risk taking. So the thought is, stop being so epistemically risk averse. Stop sitting back and refusing to believe anything because you're so scared of a falsehood, and think about the possibility that you might get a truth.
Yep. I don't have anything else to add there. So here are some further resources. What was the book that you said this was mainly taken from?
That's
at least the
this
history of
last
skepticism.
one.
Okay.
Yeah, so the last one is actually probably the most kind of academic. That's going to be Robert Pasnow. He's a philosopher at the University of Colorado and just an awesome historian of philosophy. He has a book on the history of epistemology that's called After Certainty. So if you're really nerdy, really into this, want to learn about the history of skepticism, you should go there. But that is, it's written for professional philosophers, so it's more higher level. The first three, I think, are not as high level. So the first one is I wrote an entry for the T&T Clark Encyclopedia of Christian Theology just on epistemology. The first half is a history of epistemology, and then the second half is kind of a summary of some of the big questions in contemporary epistemology. You can find that on my website and my Phil Papers page if you're interested. It's actually, I use the Pasnell book a lot, so it's like a short summary of a lot of the themes in the Pasnell book. So if you're like, I don't want to read this like 1,000-page book, you could go there. I think it's like 10 pages or something. The second thing I wanted to recommend is I have a paper that's called The Nature and Rationality of Faith. And in that paper, I go through a bunch of different reasons that you might want to treat religious claims differently, or say religious people are irrational because they have faith, and here's why that's irrational. And I basically try to, for every single claim, I say it's not going to work. Either it's actually not irrational, or it's not unique to religious people. It's not the case that most religious people have that deficiency. So, we touched on some of those a little bit, but if you want more detail, check out that paper. Again, it's on my website and my Phil Papers page. And I also have a YouTube channel. I've just started very recently. It's very small, but I have a video that's kind of an introduction to skepticism there as well, and that has some content we weren't able to touch on here. So those are sort of maybe the first three are resources that are a little bit lower level, and then the last one would be the intense big book. So,
well, I was going to say that this video is actually kind of a resource at this point. So, we did give a kind of overview of the history of skepticism, some of the popular responses. We got to talk about William James. All right, let's get to some Q&A. So I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I probably should have. We're going to take some questions. So if you have questions for Dr. Liz Jackson here today, or if you have a question for me, let's try to keep it related to this topic about skepticism, applying it consistently, how skepticism can be irrational in some cases. So let's go to the first super chat from writer John Buck. He says, question for Liz: how should a responsible, he worded this very technically, very philosophically, so I'll break it down after I ask it. How should a responsible epistemic agent respond to awareness that their epistemic peer disagrees with their position? So what he's asking is, how do you deal with disagreement? How do you respond to someone? So someone like, they seem equally intelligent, they seem equally knowledgeable, but they've looked at the same evidence and they've come to a different conclusion. What do you do with that when you come across it?
Yeah, and this is actually very related to our topic, because if you think that every time someone smart disagrees with you, you have to totally give up your opinion, that could actually lead to its own kind of skepticism, where you really can't have beliefs about controversial matters. You should withhold belief on almost anything that a smart person might disagree with you about. So this is actually very related to skepticism. I actually have a very specific view of peer disagreement, and there's actually also a video on my YouTube channel where I talk about that. But I don't want to spend too long on this. So remember, I talked about at the beginning how there's
you can spend as long as you want, because this is this is a topic that I really like to think about too. Cool. So awesome. Expound as much as you'd like.
Okay, great. So here's my view. There's belief attitudes. We talked about those at the beginning. There's a belief when you say this is true, withholding, where you say I'm not really committing either way, and then disbelief, this is false. What also, though, a lot of epistemologists think that's not the only attitude we have. We also have this attitude, and Cam knows about this, but it's called credences. And you can think about them as kind of like levels of confidence. It kind of originated from work in subjective probability. But if you think about like sort of the everyday colloquial term, it would be confidence. So, I believe 1 + 1 = 2. I believe it'll rain tomorrow. Maybe the forecast predicts like a 90% chance of rain, but my attitude towards those isn't exactly the same. I'm more confident that 1 + 1 = 2 than that it will rain tomorrow. Like, everyone knows like the Weather Channel is like inaccurate half the time or whatever. So I'm more confident 1 + 1 = 2 than that it will rain tomorrow. So it's not just belief, withholding, and disbelief. There's something else. And so again, philosophers call this credence. And basically what you do is we can say how confident you are in some proposition. 1 is maximal confidence that it's true. 0 is maximal confidence that it's false. And then you can have credences all in between. So you might have a 0.9 credence that it will rain tomorrow if there's a 90% chance of rain. You might have a 0.5 credence that like a coin will land heads. You might have like a 0.001 credence that it's snowing in the middle of the desert or whatever. You get the idea. So my view of disagreement is this. When you encounter someone who's smart and disagrees with you about something, let's say you believe P, where P is some statement, and they believe not P. What you should do is you should lower your credence. You should be less confident in your belief, but you can hold on to your belief. And the reason I think this is a really interesting view is that there's this debate in the epistemology of disagreement, and some people say you should clearly change your attitudes. You shouldn't keep holding on to your opinion. This person is smart, and that's super dogmatic and closed-minded. But these other people say, but then you couldn't have views on any controversial matters, and it's called this spinelessness worry. You can't stand up for, your view on the morality of abortion or your view on whether God exists. You just have to kind of cater to whoever these people that disagree with you. And what's cool about this view is it says, yeah, you shouldn't have the same opinion that you did before. You should lower your confidence, you should lower your credence, but you also don't have to be spineless. You can continue to believe that thing that you believed before. And depending on the issue, there might be certain cases where your confidence, you just keep encountering people that disagree with you, and your confidence gets so low that you should, at a certain point, give up that belief. But I think this can capture, a plausible idea that we can have opinions about controversial matters, but when a lot of smart people disagree with us, we shouldn't be like super, 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 super confident. We should lower our confidence. So that's my view of disagreement.
So it sounds like you were talking about epistemic superiors, not epistemic peers. Is that right?
Oh, so what's cool about this view is that you can actually capture all cases of disagreement, and you can say how much you should lower your confidence depends on, are they a superior? Are they a peer? Maybe they're a smart person that doesn't know as much as you, but they're not like a total novice, So if it's a superior, you should lower your confidence more. If it's a peer, you should lower your confidence a moderate amount. If it's a novice, you should lower your confidence just maybe a little bit. If maybe they're like a complete expert and they just know so much, maybe you should lower your confidence a ton. And then maybe there's someone that you just think they're biased or you just have no reason to trust them at all, then maybe you shouldn't change your confidence at all. But credences give you the flexibility to sort of change different amounts depending on who the person disagreeing with you is.
Man, epistemic disagreement is so fun to think about. It's one of my favorite topics, actually. Yeah.
I agree.
Well, let's move on. So thank you for sharing your view, Liz. So this one is from Russell Jones. Thanks for your super chat. How you been, Russ? Let me know. Send me a text. He says, what are her thoughts on Dr. Felipe Leon's mitigated modal skepticism? Are you aware of that? So in his book with Josh Rasmussen, he talks about it. If you're not aware, it's no big deal.
I actually just got that book. It's on my bookshelf right back here.
Oh, nice.
Take my word for. Oh yeah, it's up there, that blue one. But I have not read it, so I don't know much about it. But I will say this. My point in this video wasn't to say that all local skepticism is irrational. And in fact, it seems like there are domains where we shouldn't trust our beliefs. So let's say you're super colorblind, and you know you're super colorblind, you've been diagnosed by a bunch of doctors, you have a ton of evidence, right? Then you should be locally skeptic about your color beliefs. For whatever colors you're colorblind for, right? So that would be an example. But the thing about local skepticism there is you have a clear principled reason for why you aren't trusting your beliefs in a particular domain. And so our challenge to the religious skeptic was, you need a similar clear principled reason like the colorblind person does. So,
but then also
skepticism. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but then that reason can't be, make you skeptical of other domains outside of religion. It's got to be a reason that just makes you skeptical, and in a way that doesn't make it irrational. You've got to be able to apply it to just that one domain, which in the colorblind case, it seems really obvious. You've got a very small set of beliefs, namely your beliefs about what color things are. And that's what it applies to, because doctors, and you have all this evidence and everything, like that's a very clear principle that applies to that domain that doesn't spill over into other domains. But for religion, it just doesn't seem like you're going to be able to get that, or at least it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge for these religious skeptics who are sort of locally skeptical in this way.
And remember, I mean, you probably don't want to be skeptical about claims about rationality, about math, about claims about morality. And a lot of the principles that people often give, even if they do make you skeptical of a lot of religious claims, they're going to pull in a lot of other claims as well. So I think it's really important to be really thinking through, well, what all do I want to believe, you know?
Yeah, and let me hit on the fact too that like if that's what you want to do, you want to draw this principle distinction between religious beliefs and other beliefs, and then say in the end, after you get the principle, you're like, okay, well now I've got to be skeptical of all these other things. If that's what you want to do, then I personally, I think that's okay, but just be consistent about it. Just be a global skeptic. Be a skeptic in all of these other areas. And if that's what you want to do, more power to you. It's just not, something that I'm personally drawn to. I like we mentioned earlier, I value avoiding false beliefs, but I also value obtaining true beliefs. And so, I mean, I equally value the two of them. And so when you do that, I mean, you've got to take some risks, and you can't just be certain of everything. Otherwise, you're not going to believe anything. You can't do that if you're going to value both of them, I think. All right, let's move on. So Mickey Isum says, he says, Dr. Kaimon Kwan has written extensively on this. Is Liz familiar with his work? His book, Theism and the Rainbow of Experiences, is incredible. Says to bring him on.
I am 0 for 2 right now. I have not heard of that. I'm trying to Google these very quickly. Yeah, it looks cool. I'm sorry, I have not read that.
You don't know everything.
I bet it's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you ask me about like a really specific view.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's kind of a bummer, but like philosophy is so specialized these days. And even within just philosophy, there is so much. You can't read everything. You just can't. And then if you're asking me about, theology stuff, like I like theology, it's cool, but there's a lot I don't know. So sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's one of the cool things about philosophy is that, even in a session like this, you can learn about someone's work and then go investigate it and maybe update your credences. All right. So here is Jackson Howard says, what does Liz think about radical probabilism? Grateful for you guys. We're getting a lot of terms and stuff and names of things in this one.
Yeah, no, definitely. So radical probabilism, I'm hoping that he's thinking of the same thing I'm thinking of, but I'm pretty sure he is. It's the view that we can't actually know anything for sure. So we can be certain of nothing. And remember, like when we were talking about Descartes, how he said, I think, therefore I am. That's kind of the one fundamental thing we can be certain of. And then Hume was like, hey, like, do you really know you exist? How do you know there's not just like a thought or a belief or whatever? So I actually think probably from when I read Descartes first in undergrad to maybe like first or second year of grad school, I was like really into the cogito, and I was like, we can know that for sure. And then I was like introduced to sort of Hume's challenge, and I was just like, yeah, I don't think so. I kind of gave that up. So, but I still think even if you can't know you exist for sure, it's really hard to deny that like you couldn't know if you were in pain, for example, because it seems like the nature of pain is just something that you have to be immediately aware of or you're not actually in pain. I mean, one kind of interesting philosophical question is like, could you be in pain but not know it? But I think to know, then it wouldn't be pain, right? So I guess I do think we can't be certain, at least in the philosophical sense, about most things, but I am kind of sympathetic to the idea that there are these certain inner states that we can be, like, I can be certain when I'm in pain that I am in pain, for example. Maybe like that I'm perceiving something black. That doesn't say that this microphone exists, but I can be certain I'm perceiving something black, potentially. So, I'm still forming my views on this, not 100% sure, but if I had to deny radical probabilism, those would be the kind of cases I would probably go for. So yeah,
perceptual beliefs and stuff just seem
like inner states, though, not external.
Right.
Inner ones. Yeah.
All right. We got a really interesting question from Theodosius. I think that's how you say that. He says, I know a guy named Andy who never leaves his apartment and doesn't use the internet. He's never heard of COVID and is skeptical of my claims that it's happening. How should I convince him?
I don't know if this is about my friend Andy or not, but I have a friend named Andy who I wrote that Pascal's Wager paper with. So we went to undergrad together, but he's a little bit of a hermit. And so I think this might be a joke about him, not positive, but I think it is.
That's pretty good.
So anyway, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, we can think about a hypothetical at least.
Yeah, I mean, and this brings in one thing that I think maybe epistemologists are more sensitive to than other people, and that's this idea that everyone has their own body of evidence. So Cam has his body of evidence, I have my body of evidence, and what I should believe is at least partially a function of that evidence. And, you know, a lot of evidence is shareable. You know, I might say, Cam, there was a big storm in Tampa. And then if he doesn't believe me, I can like send him a news article about it or something. You know, I can give him that evidence that I have that there was a big storm in Tampa. But in some cases, either because someone's really stubborn or because, you know, think about the person that goes to the doctor and says, I'm having all this pain, these issues, but they can't convince the doctor of it. In some cases, evidence is really difficult to share for a variety of reasons. And so that might be part of what's going on with Andy here. It's potentially partially because he's being stubborn. It's hard for you to give Andy this evidence. So, I mean, I guess you just have to keep trying, and you have to try to give him this evidence that you have, that COVID is happening, right? But I think kind of the more important, more general point is that what you should believe is a function of the evidence that you have, at least to an extent. And that can explain why people can disagree with each other, but both be rational because they have different evidence.
I like that too. Yeah, okay, so I was thinking about this question, and I'm just going to be kind of pedantic. So he says he doesn't use the internet, but it doesn't say he doesn't watch TV. So you could just like tell him to turn on his television. That might be a way to get it. But then if he's that skeptical of stuff, you may not be able to convince him then. I mean, it is possible. We talked about it earlier, but you could be a Pyrrhonian skeptic. You could be skeptical of pretty much anything that you want to be skeptical about. So, I think that... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, I was just going to say, like, trying to have a conversation with, like, Hume or Descartes, like, it might be similar to that. Like, you can say, look, there's, like, a microphone, like, right here. It's right here, microphone. But they're just going to be like, well, what if I'm dreaming? What if I'm a brain in a vat? You know? And at a certain point, like, you don't have, like, a shared foundation that you can build up to those beliefs from. Because they're just so skeptical. They're just doubting everything. And so I think convincing a skeptic is actually a really difficult challenge. It's really difficult to do. And a lot of the responses to skepticism, so Moore has this famous response, which is, I have a hand. I just proved skepticism wrong. Here's a hand. But he says, like, this isn't going to convince a skeptic. But if you're already kind of thinking there's something wrong with skepticism anyway, then this can show you what's wrong. Is that skeptics are losing sight of common sense. And if you deny that I have a hand, then that's like, there's something wrong with your philosophical theory.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us today. This has been a really fun subject to talk about. Skepticism is pretty interesting. Part of the reason why I wanted to invite Liz on in particular is because I wanted a professional philosopher here to talk about the history of skepticism and then some of the responses so that we could situate this in the broader philosophical context and help everyone kind of understand what is going on with skepticism, like for real, because it doesn't just like, it's not just a thing in religion. It's a thing that's been going on for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And like you mentioned, all the way back to Aristotle. And so it's helpful to situate, like, just remember that there's other people who have thought about these things, and there's different views on the table and different responses that have been given. Like Locke, for example, saying that we don't have to be like certainty. Why are you so like so up and up about certainty? Like no one cares. Like you shouldn't be. You know, you should. So, and I agree with Locke on that. It's like I have no idea why people are so obsessed with certainty. But anyways, the point is that it's really helpful, I think, to situate these things in like the historical context and understand the history of skepticism, why people started to be skeptical in the first place, and then also William James, you know, avoiding false beliefs is great, but you also want to obtain true beliefs, and both of these things are valuable. So how do you weigh that, and how does that play into your skepticism? And then also, like, are you applying your skepticism consistently? A lot of these topics are just, I think, really, really important. So it was great to have you on, Liz. I'm really happy that and thanks for spending time putting all of these slides together. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said this before, but I really love the way that channels like Capturing Christianity let what philosophers are doing kind of open it up to the more general public. And I think too, I just want to reiterate what you said about the value of true belief. I think I'm personally pretty sympathetic to William James's response to skepticism, and I think it's just a good reminder for all of us that it's not just about avoiding false beliefs. Like, don't sit in your house wrapped in bubble wrap. Get out there and believe some stuff.
That's great. All right. Well, let me talk to the audience. Thanks again, Liz, for coming on. But I'll say just a couple things to the audience. So thank you, first of all, for watching this. If you've made it to this point, you probably want to subscribe to the channel. If you've watched this entire video and you're still watching it, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Also turn on the bell to get notifications. All of that stuff is a great way to help this channel grow and get more views and subscribers and all that stuff. So thank you for doing that. If you want to support the ministry, it's a great way to do it. If you'd like to support this ministry financially, it's the end of the year. So it is December 17th, 2020, as of this recording. If you'd like to support this ministry financially, end of year giving is a big thing with nonprofits. You can head over to our website, capturingchristianity.com/ I believe it's /donate. But I will have a link in the description of this video if you'd like to give an end-of-year gift to our nonprofit ministry, which we are a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization. So if that's something that you'd like to do, and it doesn't even have to be like an end-of-year thing, if you're watching this video in the future, you still like to give to the ministry, you can do that. Go over to the website. If you'd like to support us on a monthly basis, head over to patreon.com/capturingchristianity. Link to that also is in the description. You can join the Bereans, which is a private Facebook group. We have tons of awesome conversations. I share sneak peeks of upcoming videos, and it is literally the best group on Facebook, but it's a Patreon only Facebook group for supporters of the ministry. So that's the way to join that. And then if you become a patron of $10 or more, you get access to 12 apologetics courses for beginners that we recorded. And Liz Jackson talked on Pascal's wager in this one. So she was one of the teachers in this course, which is super awesome. The entire course is just unbelievably good. I could talk for 10 minutes about each one of these courses, but they're all incredibly amazing. And if you support the ministry, you get access to them. Again, $10 a month gets you access to these 12 courses. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in today. We will see you in the next Capturing Christianity video, which will be very soon. So see you soon.